Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and today I'm here with Jude Metcalfe, all the way from Australia. Welcome, Jude, and thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I appreciate
The obvious question is, how'd you wind up in Australia?
it. Through work, my company asked me to come down here in what started out as a 6-month stint, and here I am 2 years later, still here. So it's a great place, and given the virus, I'm glad I'm here right now, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I had the opportunity 25 years ago to live in the UK for 26 months, so it is a cool experience.
It is. It is. I wish I had done it earlier in my life, but no matter. Glad I'm doing it now.
That's great. So, my first question for you is, when did you start researching your family roots?
Um, I guess I've always been a little bit interested in it. I'm half Irish and half Italian, and I knew much more about the Irish side of my family. And so on the Italian side, I really wanted to know more. And so I'd always ask my aunts and uncles about things, but nobody ever really had a lot of detail, to be honest. And it wasn't until a few years ago, uh, to solve a pretty specific question, that I really got serious about it.
Yeah, I find that a lot of Italian families, the same thing, that people didn't talk a lot about it. Even in
Mhm.
my family, and even later on, I didn't think to ask some of my aunts and uncles. But by the time I started doing this, most of them had passed away, and even my mom, she didn't have a whole lot of detail.
Yeah, I don't it's crazy because I don't understand why, but they just felt like, I don't know if they got to this country and felt like, hey, I'm just going to look forward, not back. But yeah, people didn't really want to spend a lot of time talking about the past, at least on the Italian side. I know you're doing an Italian podcast here. On the Irish side, that's all they did was look to the past. So it, it was really, so I had both sides growing up.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, when I started doing my research, I came across my paternal grandmother's mother, or at least who I thought it was, and both my grandmother's uh, parents were from nobility in Naples, but I had never heard the name before. So I asked my cousin to live with her, and she knew, and she said, "Oh yes, of course, that's the family that goes back all these years," and blah 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 blah. But it wasn't. She knew because she grew up with my grandmother, and my grandmother probably used to tell her stories all the time. So where is your Italian family from?
So on the Italian side, my mother's mother is from a little town in Salerno, right, in the Salerno area, and her father is from Genoa.
Oh, nice. So you're the first person I've interviewed that actually came that family came from Genoa. And I have a friend who just recently moved to Salerno last year.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Genoa is where the story gets interesting for me, so I'm sure we'll get into that at some point.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I want to hear. So have you done a DNA test at all?
Yes, yes, yes. My entire family has, and my mother did as part of this research as well.
Oh, that's great. I kept procrastinating about, having my mom do it. And by the time, I got around to it, that it was too late. But I wish I found some third and fourth cousins in Italy, and I'm begging them to get at least some of them to do the test. I mean, I know through documentation and conversations, all of that we're related, but it would be
Hmm.
nice to have that link.
Yeah, it's always scary what you find. In my case, without the DNA test, we never would have gotten the answers we wanted. But I know a very good friend of mine who's from Sicily. He's all Sicilian. His wife's all Napolitan, and he did the DNA test, or his kids did it. His kids did it. He refuses to do it, but his kids did it, and they found out that they had, or that he had a cousin that nobody knew about because it was one of those situations where somebody, got somebody pregnant, didn't get married, and et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes you find out things you don't want to know.
Well, yeah, and we found out some very interesting things. One of them is one of my fraternity brothers from college did the test, and he found out that he's fifth cousins with my wife through Sicily.
Wow. Wow.
Um, and he found out that he had an older half brother that he had no idea.
Hmm.
And then I also found one of my cousins. Same thing. He had a child that was adopted
Hmm.
that he had made somebody pregnant, uh, and he was married at the time. And my well, they're all my cousins, I guess, but my cousin that I grew up with that I know, they had no idea. She had no clue.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
this is making my story sound a little more normal then.
yeah, mine is mostly normal. I think outside of that.
Yeah.
So I know you did, but I know you hired a pro,
Yes.
Jennifer Petrino. So how did that work out, and why did you hire a pro?
Yeah, so the situation was very difficult. I tried to do some research on my own, and my sister tried to do some things on Ancestry.com, which they do a lot of good things, but that information is only as good as what people put out there. And I'm a big facts guy, and so just because somebody says something, if they don't have proof, I don't, it doesn't mean anything to me. And so we had tried to do some research, again, unprofessionally, and we weren't getting anywhere. And so I just felt like I needed to get the professional help. And I have to say, there is absolutely no way we would have gotten the answers that we were looking for without Jennifer's help. I was, clearly she has experience in this and clearly looks under rocks I wouldn't have even thought to look under, and was able to get the answer. So we tried to do it on our own, but this was anyway, I think a fairly complex case.
Yeah, and I did a lot of research on my own too, and I'm with you. If I see something, I'm not just buying into it until I actually see some sort of proof, or able to uh, make sure that it's actually factual. In my case, with my mom's family, believe it or not, they were farmers from Bari, and Bari has almost all their records on the Antonati. So I was
Oh
like
wow.
making headway all over the place with them. I found cousins and aunts, and I mean, found everything really pretty simple. And my dad's uh, uh, grandmother, her family was very, very well documented through, nobility charts and things like that. And
Hmm.
once I started going down that path, although I really wanted to make sure that it was true, but I did the same thing. I needed help with my paternal great grandfather, because even though I knew his name and I knew confirmed that he was married to my great grandmother, I couldn't find a link in some of these charts to him.
Yeah.
And what had happened was his great grandmother, she she merged the two family names after her husband died for some strange reason. And she became the Duchess, very unusual in Italy for a woman to
Hmm.
get the title, but she did. And she merged the family names, and it was only through the professional help that he got me some extra records I couldn't find and things like that, that I was able to like put a stamp on that link. And my
Right.
dad's father, I couldn't find anything, and
Hmm.
he helped me find the Sorrentino side, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
So with that, what was the amazing discovery that you found?
Yeah. So I grew up my entire life knowing that my mother was very upset by the fact that she found out when she was 21 that she was born out of wedlock. And she grew up with the last name Fontana. Her family's name was Yakadine. That's another story. Her family's name was Yakadine, but she grew up Fontana. When she went to get married, she needed to get her birth certificate, and they told her there was no such birth certificate as Fontana. And so she had to go back to her mother, and then her mother broke down and cried and said that, she had always told her father had died before she was born. Turns out that they were never married. Turns out that her birth certificate had Yakadine, and only her baptismal certificate had the name Fontana on it. And so I don't know. My mother was just always upset by it, and she, as the older she got, she's 85 now. The older she got, the more she was upset that she didn't know who her father was, or didn't know why they didn't get married, or didn't know if she had any brothers and sisters. And I felt like I just had to do it for her. I had to try to find out for her. And again, after unsuccessfully trying it on my own, we hired Jennifer to do the research for us, and found out some fascinating stuff. In addition, we were trying to find out more backstory on her mother's family, the Yakadine family, because we went back and we couldn't find anything on them either. So Jennifer found a lot of information about both.
Oh, that's great. So,
Yeah.
so how far back was she able to go?
Oh, many many generations. I don't have it off the top of my head, but she traced back, great 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 grandparents on both sides. And the challenge was well, the challenge was two challenges, right? The challenge on my grandmother's side, my mother's mother, was that even though the name was Yakadine, they came over here as Iacadino, and that's where we lost it. And she was able to find that out, and then she was able to go back and find out, where they were from. That's the other thing. I always grew up people saying, "Oh yeah, your family's from Naples," but they weren't from Naples. And then on the other side, all she had was the name of Fontana, and she was able to find him, find out where he lived, find out that my mother had two brothers. Unfortunately, neither of them she's able to speak to now. Uh, but found out she had cousins, so we were able to connect her with cousins. But she went back, you know, to, oh boy, I don't know, the maybe 1700s. I don't know, pretty far back. She was pretty lucky. She went pretty far back. I don't have the records in front of me, but she went farther back than I needed her to, or wanted her to. But she did a great job.
Oh, that's great. It's fascinating to me that some of us just have that bug, and then some of us don't,
Hmm.
and they think we're a little like loopy. At least in my case, I just found out something interesting the other day. Ancestry offered for a few days um, free to I think it's newspapers something, I forget the whole title, but they were offering it for free for a few days. And so I started searching back, and I found out that, or I knew that my father was born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey.
Hmm.
And I found a local paper that's actually still in business. So I need to, amazing that they're still in business. So I want to contact them. But I was finding articles from the 1920s with all these things with my grandparents, and it was, Scotch Plains was very very small back then,
Yeah,
so every
yeah,
little thing that happened was in this newspaper. uh like my aunt went to vacation in Brooklyn for 2 weeks, and there was a that was in the newspaper.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, listen, despite what I said about Ancestry having information that's only as good as what people put out there, Ancestry is what helped us confirm this information because all we had was a name. Um, it was a pretty common name. It's hard to determine exactly who it is, but Jennifer was able to narrow it down and said, if there's these Fontanas out there, if we could get one of them to take a DNA test, we could see if they are related to your mother
Mm.
because the names weren't out there. And so she actually also contacted one of the family and said, "Would your mother be willing to take?" Because the cousin that my mother has is also in her 80s and she's blind, and they still speak, by the way, so it's really great. But in any event, she agreed. So we paid for her to have a DNA test. We did the DNA test with my mother. Turns out that confirmed that that was the Peter Fontana. So it's just, again, you do all this research, but the only way to 100% confirm it was to do the DNA test and to find the connection. And then, you have to have these conversations because my mother wanted answers like, why didn't they get married? Did he know about me? and I said to my mother, "You're never going to know for sure." But
Mhm.
I think through speaking to this woman and finding out about her father and what he was like, I think she came to understand that he probably didn't know about her. At least that's the impression everybody has, because nobody knew. And just based on how he was, they find it hard to believe. But yeah, the whole thing was just a crazy emotional journey. And I feel good as a son that I was able to get some closure for my mother, to the extent that she could. I really did see a change in her when she at least had some answers. Like, she literally went 60 plus years, um, with these questions in her head, and was finally able to get them answered.
Wow, that's something. Yeah, my children are adopted, and now it's not like it was before. I mean, they do
Hmm.
seal the things until they're 18,
Hmm.
but you can find. And my daughter wanted to find her birth parents, which we were fine with. Um, and my son doesn't care. My son, we've asked him a few times, and he's 25 now, and he's just not interested. So it's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah,
Some people really, really want to know, and others don't. And I've come across other people. And to your point about your mom's father probably not knowing, I think that was the same thing with my friend.
yeah.
Um, I don't think his father probably knew.
Hmm.
Um, but that's just that's just a guess. But he actually found. I mean, he found his half brother quite by accident, because they just both happened to do the DNA
Oh, really?
test.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
he had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with my mother, I think part of the issue is my mother's very religious, and I think part of it was when she found out that they hadn't been married and being born out of wedlock and that kind of thing. I think it really affected her in that way. Um, so I think that's why it was so problematic for her. I mean, I've never had that conversation with her, but that's what I think it is.
Well, and at least it gave her some closure. I mean, I could think, thinking about how my mom would have reacted to something like that.
Hmm.
And knowing Italians, there was probably some inherent guilt there someplace,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and even though she didn't do anything wrong.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Yeah, no, no, you're right. I think she just felt bad about herself. And it's funny. I I never asked my grandmother about it when she was alive. I just wonder how she felt about it with my mother too. If she felt guilty about that because they had lied to her for so long. I mean, it's one thing to it's one thing to have that situation happen. It's another to tell her that story. At the time I assume they just thought she's never going to know, not realizing that for her to get married, she had to go get the birth certificate. And frankly, if his name wasn't on the baptismal certificate because the church insisted, she wouldn't have even had that name.
Right? Yeah, that's right. That's something, huh?
Yeah. Thank God for the church sometimes with the records they keep, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I have a friend who she's probably 15 years younger than me at least, and she's from Flushing, Queens, and
Mhm.
she didn't know she was adopted for a long time, and then she went to get a driver's license, and
Mhm.
she asked her parents, I need a birth certificate, and they didn't have one. To
Oh,
this day,
wow.
she doesn't have a birth certificate.
Wow.
She has no idea, and um, her father is a very, very old school type of Italian guy, and he said, "Well, you're my daughter. That's all you need to know."
Mm.
And she said, "But I can't get a passport. I can't get a license. I can't do anything." And
Yeah.
some I forget. She told me the story, but I forget exactly how she was able to get something that she was able to, may have even been a baptismal certificate, but she was able to eventually get something. But she has no idea, how she was adopted, if she was
Hmm.
legally adopted. She doesn't have a clue. There's no papers on anything.
Wow, wow. Yeah,
Um,
I've heard stories about people who can't, if they can't find a birth certificate and they won't give them a birth certificate, and yeah, it's a real problem. Hmm.
yeah, no, no, absolutely. So have you gone to Italy? Have you visited there?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I've been over there. Not to Genoa, but I've been down south. Down near Salerno. I've been, just the major places. But yeah, been there. Love it there.
Yeah, we were supposed to be there in April.
Oh,
We
were
had a
you?
whole
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a whole tour planned out. We were going to just spend a little time in Rome, spend most of the time in Naples because that's where my dad's family was from. And I hired a person. It's called Italy Rooting, and what they do is she's she does some genealogy work, but she's
Hmm.
more of bringing you back to the time of your ancestors.
Yeah,
So she had, and she wouldn't tell me everything. I mean, because she wants you to be surprised.
of
But
course.
we were supposed to go to some of the homes from my grandmother's family because some of them
Wow.
is still there, and uh, we were going to have a lunch with some of the third and fourth cousins there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I mean, I've only met these people on Facebook.
Yep.
So uh, and I was able to do a lot on Facebook. uh,
Oh,
you
really?
know
Yeah.
well, my grandmother's name was Piramalo,
Hmm.
and that's not a very common name
No.
in Italy. So there was, finding Piramalos was pretty simple. And because some of these records were documented, I could actually, I saw people um, who, the family that inherited the title, they're still listed. They still keep these lists. So people born in
Wow.
the 1960s are on this list. So
Hmm.
I was able to make that linkage. And then I went back to other people and I said, is this right? Is this family and this that family? And they confirmed everything that I was seeing on these things. So, um, y- it's just, and we were going to go to Sicily. My wife's mother's family's from Sicily. So
Hmm.
we're hoping this thing's going to blow over enough so we'll be able to go in October and
Yeah,
get that
yeah.
done.
Well, it's probably a good thing you hadn't been there when you were. Now, had you been to Italy before, or was this going to be your first trip? Or.
No, we had been there. We had gone 25 years ago when we lived
Hmm.
in England. Because it's so
Oh,
easy
yeah.
to go any place. It's a snap. So we spent a couple of days in Rome. Then we went down. We took the train to Naples, where I picked up a car, and then we went to Sorrento. And
Hmm.
what I didn't know at the time was that my grandmother lived a half a mile from the train station in Naples.
Oh my God.
So we could have just walked there
Yeah,
and saw all these places,
yeah.
And her some of her family documented very well, and they have the addresses there, so that's how I knew where they were. And
Mm.
it seemed like the family pretty much, they must have owned a good chunk of the buildings on that street because the addresses are like 23, 28, 30.
Hmm.
Different members of the family all lived right next door to each other, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well,
and the current Hotel Caracciolo in Naples was one of the palaces going back to the 1600s from my grandmother's mother's family.
wow.
Um, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to get there. And
Yeah, I hope you do. Well, well, you came from the rich stock. I came from the poor stock.
well, I come from both. my
Yeah,
my mom's family, when I researched them, and you look back at their records, everybody was the men were farmers and the women were either farmers or seamstresses.
right, right. Yep.
And my father's family, and my father kind of knew, but if my father knew what he knew now, there'd be no living with him. But one great piece of history that we were lucky to have, and I kind of found out quite by accident by talking to somebody. My cousin, my uncle didn't come to America until 1950. His
Oh,
when my grandparents came from Bari, uh, they came because the World War I was starting, and my grandfather had spent time in Libya in the Italian army.
mm,
And my grandmother said, "You're not going to war again. We're going to America." But they didn't think they were going to stay. So they left
no.
my oldest uncle in the care of his grandparents in 1915. Well, like they came here. I guess they started making a living and they started having more kids. Um, and I'm not quite sure. There's two stories. One is that they couldn't afford to bring my uncle over, which
Hmm.
probably could have possibly been true. The
Yeah,
other is that the grandparents weren't going to send him because he was like their kid now.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so when he wanted to come, he was 18 and he had to go in the Italian army. Then he got married and he started having children, then the war and all of that. So he didn't come until 1950. So all my cousins were born in the same house that my great grandparents owned in Bari. And my youngest cousin from that uncle, he interviewed my uncle in Barres before he died.
Wow.
And I said, "You have to translate this." And he said, "Well, I tried once and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get through it and all of that." And I said, "You have to." I said, "This is like the family history. We need to know
Yeah.
this." So he did. He sat down with his sister and he went through it. And it's a fascinating look back into what it was like to live in a small Italian town in the
Oh, I'm sure.
1920s and 30s and through the war
Yeah.
and all of that. Uh, but my great grandfather owned a cow, and he would walk through the town with my uncle. And if you wanted fresh milk, he'd stop in front of the door, milk the cow,
Oh,
and that's
wow.
how that's how he made his living.
Wow. Well, when I was over there, my family's from a really tiny town, Monte San Giacomo. It's in the hills, and we looked at it on the map, but there's nothing to the town. So when I was there, it would have been a really long drive to get there. It was out of the way, and I decided not to do it just because, um, I didn't know anyone there, and it was just so far away, and the town looked so tiny. But now that you've mentioned this Italian routing,
Italy
Italy,
rooting.
Italy routing, I have
Yeah.
to. That's a great thing. I have to look into that because, maybe there is, somebody there, or at least something I could see there. That would be interesting.
And she does the whole country. So even if you went there and you went to Genoa, there's a couple of blogs on it, and I also have an interview with Letizia on
Hmm.
one of the podcasts, and she's very very nice.
Oh, so she
She's
was one of
great.
the podcast. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
The Genoa thing was also a funny story, right? Not what I expected at all, but being up in Genoa, but the town that they're from, everybody was named Fontana. So everybody that got married a Fontana, who married a Fontana, who married a Fontana. So that's why I give Jennifer credit. It was really hard with everybody having the same name. It was
I can
crazy.
imagine. I never heard of
Yeah,
that before. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I know from my mom's family is actually outside of Bari. It's Torito, and it's not quite like that. But it's probably like five or six main names, that were there. So when I look back on ancestry, this one married this one, and that one married that one, and the other
Yeah.
one married that one. And on my father's mom's side, or even her father, I look at the records, and the occupation is, property owner. One of them actually, it says rich person as their occupation.
No need to work. Yeah.
Uh, and I couldn't figure out why my grandmother came, why they
Mm,
came here, because
yep.
they were from aristocratic families. And then I came across, um, a Maria Piramalo that came to the United States in 1805.
Hmm.
So I said, well, gee, the name is so uncommon. They have to be related. There must
Hmm.
be a relationship here. So I started digging, and I asked one of my older cousins, and he said, no, she didn't have any relatives here. And I said, well, Paul, I said, I'm pretty sure. I said because she's only a few years younger than her father. I said, and there would be no other reason for her to come here.
Hmm.
And um, I said that they lived at this address in New York City. And he said, give me that address again. So I gave him the address again, and he said, that's the address where my mother fell out the window, five stories.
Oh man.
So I said, she fell out the window 5 stories. He said, well, yeah, what actually happened, she fell out the window and the wash lines broke her fall. So, the old tenements in New York
Yeah,
where they have
yeah,
all those
yeah,
rocks? Yeah.
yeah.
So I think she broke a foot or something like
It's like
that.
jumping into a net almost.
Yeah, yeah. So I said, well, that's it, Paul. I said, why would they live there with the same name and all of that?
Right,
So
right.
a little while after that, to your point about ancestry and finding things, I get an email on Ancestry from somebody, and she says, I think we're researching the same person. So I said, yeah, we are. I said, that's my great Maria Piramal is my great grandfather's sister. She says, are you sure? I said, I'm positive. There's no question about it. We're cousins, this, right?
Hmm.
So she says she wanted to be positive. She did the ancestry test and she messaged. She said, I got my results. You're not on it. So I look and I see she's on mine. So
Hmm.
I said, you have to be. I said, so she called
Right.
them and they had a mistake or something and they
Oh wow.
whatever happened.
Right.
But so as we're going through all of this thing, I find out that her grandmother was uh, uh, Beatrice P-Tex. Now, my parents always said they used to go to the P-Texes, how we are going to see Aunt Beatrice and all of this stuff, P-Tex. And so now the things are connecting. It turned out as we started going through this, because everybody in her family had passed away by then. My dad was gone, my mom was gone. Um, so we figure out that um, her grandmother and her cousin um, lived in the same house in Flushing. When I first got married, I lived 5 blocks away from them for 5 years.
Wow.
So we must have been passing each other on the street.
Mm.
My
Well, that.
first cousin was her cousin, or another cousin,
Right.
Jean, was her bridesmaid. My father took the wedding pictures. So all of this stuff was going on, and we had
Yeah.
no idea.
Well, you talk about the block things. Remember, I told you that Jennifer turned over rocks I never would have turned over. The way she zeroed in on a very common name, Peter Fontana, the way she zeroed in on the name is she looked at the census data, and looked for Fontanas that lived in. My mother was born in Hoboken. Uh, Fontana's in Hoboken. He literally lived 5 blocks from her from the time my mother was born until she moved out of the house after she got married. 5 blocks. So same thing, had to be passing. But that's what, I would have never thought to do that. But Jennifer said, listen, they had to be local. And that's how she zeroed in on that Fontana and then traced it all the way back and then doing the DNA test. So same thing, 5 blocks away the whole time. Um,
Wow,
you know,
that's
so
amazing.
yeah, yeah, it's just crazy. And that's where, again, going back, giving my mother some comfort. She goes, "Well, he must have seen me." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
I'm sure he did." I don't know for sure, but it made her feel better knowing that
Well, he
he would have seen
probably
her.
he probably did, but to
Yeah,
your point, he probably didn't know.
I don't think he knew. I don't think he knew.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, but that's unbelievable. But that's what a professional gives you sometimes. That
Oh
thinking of
boy,
back then. Nowadays it's different, but back
right?
then, yeah, it was probably local. They did it through the church, or they did it through
Yep, yep.
whatever Catholic charities or something like that.
Hmm.
And these people want a baby, and you have, this young girl's pregnant, and they made a match, and that was that. And they weren't too crazy about the birth certificate. See, with my kids, we at least in Florida, the way they did it was they issued a new birth certificate with our names on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So my kids both show us as the parents. Now you can, I think you can go back because they've unsealed it, and once you're 18, I think you can go back and get the original.
Hmm.
But the official one is the one with our names on it. So that's the one
Oh,
that's the
that's a
one
new
that
one
you
on me. I
use.
didn't know that. Now, you
Yeah.
said that's only in Florida, or is that everywhere?
I don't, every state is different. So I'm not
Hmm.
sure, but I know that's the way it works in Florida. And Florida has a registry where the birth parents and the child, when the child is 18, can register
Hmm.
and try and make the connection. Now, in our case, they didn't do that. We hired someone to do the research
Hmm.
and find Nicole's birth parents, and so we did that, and that's how she found them. Um, but yeah, Florida was uh, very easy, and that's why we did it there. For anybody who may be listening who's looking to adopt, um, when we did it, we worked through an attorney and everything, and he picked. He said, "You want to, you want to adopt through this state, this state, this state, this state. These states you want to stay away from." And in Florida at the time, I don't know if it's still the same. Um, as soon as the birth parents signed, it was irrevocable. Some states they could make a claim
Right.
like up to 6 months,
Yeah, yeah.
um, but Florida was irrevocable, and the finalization was very simple. In fact, we we did the finalization with my son while we were living in England because we explained to the lawyer we were in England, and so she said, "Well, let me ask the judge. Let me find out." So the judge said, "Let them. All they have to do is go to a lawyer's office, um, or a judge or something like that,
Hmm.
and be sworn in. We could do it over the telephone as long as there's we know who they're being sworn in by and all of that." Uh, so that was really really pretty simple.
Wow. That's good to know.
Yeah,
I'm way past the point of thinking about having any more kids, but
me too.
you never know. That's interesting information.
Yeah,
Wow.
and like I said, maybe somebody's listening out there that
Yeah. Yeah.
wants to know. Well, I appreciate it, Jude. This is fascinating. I know it's getting late there. It's
Yeah, that's okay.
almost my bedtime there. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. I'm used to it being up late, so it's not a problem.
Okay, well, great. Thanks again.
Yeah, this was interesting. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.